Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Holland. I'm a businessman and an entrepreneur. I'm a CPA that's worked in the corporate world, and I've worked in the investment and financial services industry. I've also started multiple companies that have achieved millions of dollars in revenue, and I've sold companies with multi-million-dollar valuations. You can find more about my background at our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. On Twitter, connect with me. A Holland Podcast is my Twitter handle, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, so that you can get updates every Wednesday when we post the video version of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us each and every Wednesday to talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Now, if you've ever read the Wall Street Journal, you've noticed that they have a little section on the second page, typically called corrections and amplifications. Well, in the podcast world, we have the opportunity to do the same. I've gotten some feedback from some of my listeners of some mistakes that I made about the areas in California from wine connoisseurs. In episode 18, we talked with Mark McWilliams, the owner of Arista Winery, a very high-end luxury winery. And throughout that podcast, multiple times, I referred to that winery being in the Napa Valley. Well, I was wrong, and I mistakenly said Napa Valley. It's actually in Sonoma County. So if you've listened to that podcast and you know that area very well, and you love wine, much like I do, and that drove you crazy, I apologize for that. There is a big distinction between Napa Valley and Sonoma County, especially for those of you that are very familiar with that area. So that's my little correction and amplification for the Andrew Holland Podcast. I recently had the opportunity for business to travel across the country, both by plane and by car, going over 1,800 miles. And it was over half of the country, going from Wisconsin to Arizona for a business trip. And on the way, driving from Wisconsin to Arizona, of course, we stop at multiple different gas stations across the Midwest and in the Southwest as we neared our destination in Arizona. And one of the things that really struck me or dawned on me, and this tends to happen when I travel, and I hear it from many people who travel, that you begin to learn the importance or the opportunity that's created by observation. In this digital age where everything is 24/7, we can get as much information as we want in the blink of an eye on our phones. And there are so many things asking for our input on Facebook, input on Twitter, input on whatever the case may be. We can always give our thoughts and opinions, and we do it constantly. And what I've learned and what I've seen is because of the speed of our current world and because of the opportunity for us to always give our input and be participating, we have lost the art of observation. Just taking a step back and observing. Now, for those of you who have traveled in airports, you may be one of the many people that love sitting there while you're waiting for your plane and doing what we call people watching. Simply observing how humans interact, the all sizes and varieties of different humans traveling. You may wonder, where are they going? And if you're sitting in your particular area where you're about to board the plane, I don't remember what they call that, and you see next door Hawaii, I get all these imaginations of, oh, these people are going on a vacation. And it's interesting to see the varying people throughout an airport. Now, typically when we're doing that, people watching, and I don't particularly enjoy it, but I don't not enjoy it, that's observing. But we're observing more for the thrill of it, or for the enjoyment, or quite frankly, just the amusement of people watching, and it can be quite amusing, people watching in an airport, as I'm sure all of us have discovered. When I talk about the art of observation, certainly that is a good step of just taking or just sitting back and observing. But the power of observation, specifically for business, is much more deliberate. It's a much more systematic approach of understanding your customers, understanding markets, competitors, industry trends, understanding internal processes within your company where bottlenecks or are things efficient or inefficient, and using data to make analysis and to improve or enhance your decision making. Now, that's a lot of what I will say complicated jargon, if you will. But to break it down, what I want to talk about today is the power of observation for small business owners, medium sized business owners, all business owners, specifically as it relates to humans. Now, what's often talked about is customers, observing trends, customer behaviors, patterns. Where are they buying things? You have companies, Walmart, that spend millions, if not billions of dollars on systems called Retail Link, that is basically their entire supply chain management. And it's all focused on getting the products to the customers when and where they want it, identifying consumer behaviors so you can better get that connection between your product and the consumer. And there are, of course, companies spending billions of dollars trying to understand consumer trends and behaviors and why they buy what they buy and when they buy what they buy. Amazon is probably one of the best in the world at understanding and looking at all the trends on their website of when people buy certain things. Now, many companies, of course, those large ones we've all heard about, and it doesn't come as a surprise to many of us that they're spending billions of dollars to analyze this data. But how often do we, as business owners, and quite frankly, just as humans in our own personal lives, stop, take a step back, and instead of providing input into a situation, just observe? Observing humans is one of the most powerful opportunities that we as business owners have in the 21st century, because so frequently in this day and age, it's not happening. Certainly, the data is being analyzed, and certainly there's all sorts of information that you can get from that data. But I'm just talking about human interaction, why humans say the things they say in the situations that they say, why people behave in certain ways in certain situations. And so that's what I want to focus on. And when you're talking about business and you're talking about observation, it almost always is exclusively focused on customers and understanding customers. But you've noticed that I've said observing humans, because as important as customers are to every business, just as important are your teams, are your employees, are your suppliers and your vendors. And so there are tremendous opportunities to be had if you take the time to observe the interactions and the relationships of those three segments. I want to focus on the most common, as I just talked about, customers. The reason observation can be so powerful for customers is the opportunities that you can identify that maybe someone has missed. One of the best examples that I love of this is Procter and Gamble came up with arguably one of their most popular and profitable cleaning brands, Swiffer, simply through observation. And I don't know all the studies and all the market tests and research that went into this, but at its most simplistic form, they realized that many of their customers were cleaning using typical mops and rags. And they thought to themselves, this seems quite archaic. Is there a more efficient way for us to do this? And if you've ever utilized the old mop and bucket system, it can be very taxing and very annoying, filling up the bucket with water, putting in the appropriate disinfectant solution, putting the mop in there, squeezing it out, and it goes on and on and on. Anybody who's used that know exactly what I'm talking about. Think about that. Simply by observing that their customers were buying their mops and their rags and still had a lot of inefficiencies or troubles or annoyances, really, with that type of cleaning mechanism, led them to Swiffer. And it's almost impossible to find a home without a Swiffer broom or Swiffer jet in the country, in the United States of America anymore. Many people ask, I want to start a business. What should I start? My response to you is start observing. Don't input every opportunity you have. Just sit back on every chance that you have, whether you're traveling, whether you're at home and you're identifying your kids playing, whether you're on the playground, whether you're at school, whether you're at a function of a hobby function, playing basketball. Take some time to be methodical and just watch. I'm as guilty of this as anybody else. When you are in a business and you're wearing so many hats and you hardly have enough time to complete all the tasks that you have to do every single day, that's the reality of being a business owner and an entrepreneur. It is so easy to forget to set aside time to just observe. And so while it's important to observe customers, what we just talked about and things you can create by doing so, something as simple as coming up with a better solution to mops and rags. Observe in many areas, any area in your life, if you want to start a business and you're not sure what to start. And it will take some time, but if you start getting in the habit of deliberately and methodically, what I call systematically, using the power and the art form of observation, you will quickly identify, and when I say quickly, it may be weeks, it may be months, opportunity places in the market or opportunities in the marketplace that have a problem and need a solution. That has happened many, 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 many times. Airbnb is a perfect example. They basically started when they were in San Francisco and they realized that there was a shortage of hotels and there was a lot of underutilized housing capacity. I could go on and on about all the examples of where good businesses, household names now were started simply by the fact of observation and seeing what was missing and thinking of that particular industry, lodging in a different manner. If you go across multiple industries, think about the beauty industry. You see many, many eco-friendly brands and products because people observed, and this is a more of a high level observation, but there was a strong desire to have more eco-friendly, more natural products. And so you can look at all the beauty line of products that are going natural, whether it's shampoos or makeups or what have you. Same thing's happening in the food industry. Look at the meal prep industry. Everybody has become so busy and on the go, and fast food was developed 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s of this country because more women started to work because of World War II, and there was less time to cook at home, and people had cars. And so the convenience of going through a drive-through and quickly being able to bring dinner home for the family, it was simply an observation of the trends and where society was going. That same thing has happened in the meal prep industry where people want healthier food they can cook at home, but they don't want to take all the time to shop for it and to prep for it. So you have HelloFresh. You can go across industry by industry, whether it's transportation and Airbnb, whether it's the lodging industry and Airbnb, whether it's transportation and Uber and Lyft, noticing the opportunity there, all the unutilized cars and people being able to provide riders for fellow humans, not just taxis. The meal prep industry, the eco friendly natural industry. It goes on and on. All of that started with simply observations of customers and society trends and where things were going. So, if you're looking for an opportunity to start a business, start practicing observation methodically, and you will eventually find an opportunity that hasn't been identified. Turning to, and this is particularly important for business owners, entrepreneurs, and leaders in all organizations. Oftentimes, leaders, whether they're CEOs or CFOs or at the head of the food chain, if you will, spend a lot of time giving their input because that's partly their role, especially if you're a CEO. You're expected to reflect the brand, you're expected to talk about the brand, represent the brand well. People want to hear from you. And while that's important, and you need to establish a positive culture where you are communicative with shareholders, with your employees, with other stakeholders, with society at large, regardless of the industry you're in, sometimes we can forget as leaders to observe. And particularly important is observing your teams, observing your employees. And those companies that have fostered a culture of observation and learning, and it starts at the top. And one of my favorite sayings that you've heard me talk about in many podcasts is culture eats strategy for breakfast every day of the week and twice on Sundays. Those companies that have fostered a culture of observation and learning are the ones that often are on the leading edge of technology, are analyzing the data, are working collectively as teams to accomplish a particular goal for their customers. And so, if you're a leader, I want you to think about this question. When's the last time you took an hour on a day or a week and just sat in the office? And I know that's a little bit more challenging in this day and age when so much work is remote, but let's just talk about the office because people are starting to go back to the office and you can still observe in team meetings to the extent that everybody's got their cameras on and what have you. When's the last time you took an hour just to observe your team? When's the last time you took the opportunity just to observe your fellow colleagues that you work closely with, whether it's in a meeting or whether you're traveling together? That art of observation for leaders in this day and age, when your input is always so desired, can be lost. But you can't let that happen to you, particularly when you're trying to create strong teams and close interactions throughout the organization. And so, at least on a weekly basis, and it doesn't matter how big or how small your company is, at least on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, as leaders, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we need to take time to sit back and observe. And this is something that I myself am really trying to put into practice. And it is so hard when you are so busy with so many different things, but you are going to miss out on so many opportunities. And you're going to really miss the elephant in the room many times if you don't start proactively taking time to just observe. Observe your employees, observe your colleagues, observe your teams. See how do your teams interact. See what individual strengths does each particular member of your team have versus the other ones. And that will help you foster and create teams for different projects or strategic objectives within your organization. When you observe and you can foster that culture of observation, not just for yourself, but for everybody around, you will see the ability for your organization and your company to achieve incredible things. And mistakes will happen. But that's the other beautiful thing about observation. Typically, you can identify mistakes or perhaps relationships that aren't going to work well if you put certain individuals together in a team in advance of actually doing it. And again, we could talk about observations of competitors and marketplaces and the economy and of processes within your organization and bottlenecks of data analysis. But I really want to focus on the human aspect. And that's what we're doing today because that's so important. I think the human in the 21st century has been lost. And I don't say that in a pessimistic way. I say that in a realistic way, in that technology drives everything these days. And we all have our cell phones and we all have our computers, and the media and televisions are everywhere. And now you have artificial intelligence, AI, that's doing so many things. And we forget that behind every incredible organization are a solid group of humans. Behind every good product are inventors or creators who came up with that product. Behind every really successful anything, whether it's families, organizations, economies, it's made up of humans. And that human element has been lost, I believe. But I think there's opportunity for us to bring it back. And it starts by just observing. Psychology, as they say, understanding humans, is one of the most incredible art forms that you can practice in and use it to the success of your business. And we could delve into relationships, we could delve into friendships, we can go into all of those things because that's relevant and important for each and every one of those things. But we're focusing on business and the humans that are involved in business. So we've talked about customers, we've talked about your teams and employees, and I want to talk about suppliers and vendors next. I think one of the things I've experienced in working with perhaps competitors, but friendly competition across multiple industries, particularly in the construction industry, is your relationships with your vendors, really your partners, is integral to your success as an overall company. And if you treat your vendors simply as someone across a screen or someone across a computer, and you forget to take a step back, observe, reflection is another word that I like to include with observation, that your vendors are made of humans. If you forget that, the relationship, the opportunity for a strong relationship, so that you can call on them when you need an emergency and they'll have a reason to respond, can be missed. Don't let that happen to you. I think in this day and age, we often uh, recognize, and more recognizing the importance, and through podcasts like this and overall business conversations, the importance of employees and making sure that your teams and your employees are satisfied and having good cultures. The customer and customer service has been around for a long time, and the focus there has been there for a long time. But I think we often forget the importance of the relationships with our vendors and our suppliers. And as I was saying in construction, being a general contractor, your relationships with your subcontractors is so important. And this is just one specific industry example. For all of those listening, apply this to your industry. Who are your vendors? Who are your suppliers? When's the last time that you called them up and said, "You know what? Thank you so much for helping us with this order. Or thank you so much for getting this done for us." Or just thank you for being one of our suppliers or vendors, because without you, we can't do what we do. If you haven't done that recently for your key vendors and suppliers, and quite frankly for all of them, do it. It's such an easy thing to do, and it will go leaps and bounds in building that strong human relationship with your vendors and suppliers. And this is all about observation, and that's what this is. If you haven't done this, take a step back, observe, ask yourself, have you done that? Have you talked to your key vendors and suppliers recently and told them thank you, or told them what they're doing well, or told them where things are struggling and how they can improve? That is the power of observation. When you take time to get away from the hustle and bustle and clear your desk in spite of the many tasks that you have to take care of as a business owner, entrepreneur, and leader, but take time to step back and observe, you'll start coming to these realizations that, you know what? We're having this issue in our company, and it's because of this particular vendor or supplier, and we don't have a strong relationship with them. How can we improve that? Or we're having a problem with this team, and it's because this one person or these few people just aren't interacting very well because they're either both the same type of person, perhaps type A personalities, and so they'd be better on opposite teams. Not that you can't have multiple type A personalities on the same team, but you understand what I'm saying. Sometimes those personalities can clash. Whereas if you had a type A and more type B people on the team, you'd have one leader and you could accomplish what you're trying to do. When have you just taken a step back to observe those things? And when you do that, and focusing on business right now, but this is a really excellent thing to practice in your relationships, in your friendships, at home, in so many situations in life. I think you'll be surprised at how many things you realize are staring you right at the face, obvious answers for problems that come to you just because you took the time to sit back and observe. Some of the most successful, secularly speaking, businessmen often say that one of the key powers of their success is taking time out of their week, every single week, for observation, reflection. And the reason for that is because it instills and fosters the opportunity for creativity. And when you give your brain an opportunity to just absorb and think, the creative things that come in terms of new market opportunities, new competitive opportunities, new product opportunities will abound tremendously. And it doesn't matter who you talk to, whether it's Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, talk to any of them. They take the time to observe, reflect, and foster an environment of creativity. And if you start doing that across the board, and especially you do it to understand humans, whether it's customers, whether it's your employees and colleagues, or whether it's your vendors, you will be able to accomplish things in a quicker period of time than you otherwise thought possible. And that's the point of observation and the power of observation. So I want to reflect and I want to ask you a few questions to think about before we end the podcast. I've asked you multiple questions about if you're a leader, when's the last time have you just sat back and observed your team? When's the last time you've talked and thanked your vendors? But I want to conclude with when's the last time you asked for other people's input? Observation, just sitting back and observing, listening, absorbing is really, really important. But observation also includes, and I should say the best observation also includes getting feedback. That's a part of observation. When's the last time you talked to your customers and you asked them, what can I do better with my business experience? If you're a restaurant owner, when's the last time you sat down and had a focus group with perhaps your regular customers who obviously like something that you're doing if they come back frequently, but it doesn't have to be regular customers. But you had a meaningful interaction and ask them for feedback, constructive, honest feedback about what they could be doing better. If you haven't done it, do it. And I bring up the restaurant industry because that's what first came to mind, but you can do this in every single industry. It doesn't matter what industry you operate. When's the last time you had a team meeting or maybe a one-on-one and you sat down and said, "Hey, Charlie, if you were in my shoes, what would you do differently here? How do you think we can operate better?" If it's been a while, do that. And don't just do it with one team member, do it with as many team members as you're able to. And sometimes you can do that in teams and everybody's confident and comfortable and providing their raw feedback right there. But sometimes you might need to do it in a more concealed way or just in a more personal way, one-on-one. I think you can build those connections with your colleagues and employees in a better fashion when you do it one-on-one, but there's also many opportunities or times when you need to do it in group settings. Sometimes you might need to do it in a more clandestine way if you have sometimes some people are afraid to provide their raw, constructive, honest feedback to you because they think there might be retribution. If you fostered a culture of observation and feedback, hopefully that's not the case, but maybe do it in some type of internal survey or an anonymous question and answer survey so that people can be free and willing to share any and all responses, because it's those leaders that do actually want the observations and feedbacks of those around them, the honest observations and feedbacks, good, bad, and ugly, that are often the most successful. And then lastly, when's the last time you asked your vendors or suppliers for their input? How are things going for them? Are there things that you could be doing that would make their lives easier, that would improve the experiences that they have with you? I think just thinking about that and asking for that feedback across customers, employees and colleagues, and your vendors and suppliers will open opportunities that you didn't know exist. Well, that's all the time that we have for this week's episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. A little bit shorter one this week, but I think it's so important to bring up in this day and age, as I said, how lacking the power of observation is. And as I traveled the country and I started to do that across many different parts with different peoples and cultures and different states, that just became readily evident to me that that's something that I'm missing and I need to do a better job of focusing on. And I think all of us can do a better job and put more focus and emphasis on when everything has become so technologized or technological, and the human side of that and just observing humans and interactions can be missing. If you have any ideas or suggestions for topics or guests that you want to see us have on this podcast, please reach out to me, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. You can send me an email right there. Of course, you can tweet at me. A Holland Podcast is my Twitter handle. We have conversations outside of this podcast all the time. And lastly, in terms of participating in the podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, so you can get the weekly updates when we post the video version every week. As I always say, this podcast is only as good as we collectively make it, and the more participation and feedback we have, as at the beginning of this episode, I got feedback from our listeners and viewers that I made kind of a crucial error on the Napa Valley versus Sonoma County. I want to hear those things. I want any and all constructive feedback, and I also love ideas and suggestions for guests and different topics. Thank you so much for listening to us this week. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast, for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.